For once, he managed to keep a promise he made. That wasn't to say he received treatment or actually spent any time at the infirmary, but he promised to see sooner, and he had poked his head in and said hello. That she hadn't had the chance to return it, or really understood why he was doing it at all, it was still a promise fulfilled. If not in the spirit, then in the wording. Actually, come to think of it, hadn't he said he would keep it the same way he had the other one? In that case, perfect. He twisted both into unrecognizable compromises. Consistency had been achieved. His scroll flashed alive, and as words opened across the screen, he smiled and flicked through them. Well, Blake had proven true to her word again. Another location that they would check out. She even included a suggestion that they would do it in 2 or 3 days. That gave him plenty of time to visit beforehand and make sure Crow dealt with the place. They've got to be feeling the pinch by now. Hopefully this will be the straw that breaks their back. Before he broke his, anyway. Anger met with a dull ache inside his heart as he violently scrubbed his arm where she had touched him. He couldn't believe she dared approach like that. But at the same time, as far as they knew, he shouldn't have any idea who she was. That was why the monster had been smiling. She enjoyed her subtle wordplay, unaware that he had been able to see beneath each and every one. So he was an illness to get rid of, was he? He shook his head. It wasn't a bad thing to call him that, whether Cinder knew it or not. Right now he was nothing more than an irritation, a bad cold. But with his gift he would be able to remain with her forever. She would never get rid of him. Not until he finally grew strong enough to kill her once and for all. He'd been compared to less favorable things in his life before. Still, keeping her unaware for as long as possible now would be the best bet. If I die here, then all I really achieve is a little extra knowledge on 1 or 2 new White Fang facilities. He would wake up a few months before Beacon. Too little time for him to make any significant changes. It would likely take him another 10 or so lifetimes just to get back to the 2-year mark. And that was only possible because he knew what series of events to take in order to achieve it. Better that she ignores me until I can get out of here. He paused in a hallway as a yearning chasm opened up deep inside his stomach. His head swarmed, and for a moment, he feared he might fall over. When was the last time he thought about getting expelled? When was the last time he focused on his plan? His hands shivered as he clenched and unclenched them before his eyes. The plan was to get expelled and escape the oncoming disaster, not to run around hunting down the White Fang like it would make a difference. It wouldn't. He already knew that. All of this was to prevent Blake and others from drawing Cinder's attention. That was to let him have more freedom to slip away when the time came. This was supposed to be so that he could spend more time with his family. His family. When was the last time he had even talked to them? Jaune's hand fumbled with his scroll as he drew it before him and checked the call logs. The last ones had been to his team. Mostly messages between Blake and he, though the occasional ones from Ruby too. He hadn't called his family since he'd last seen them, a little over a week or more ago. Hadn't he promised to call them each and every day? His fingers danced across the screen as he fought down a panicked breath. Jaune? Sapphire's face appeared on the device. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and a relieved smile blossomed across her face. Oh, thank God. She whispered, Jaune, we were so worried. We haven't heard from you for so long. I'm sorry. He rasped, in a voice thick with emotion. Are you okay? You sound strange. I've been ill. He hated himself even as he said it. Sorry I haven't called, Saf. Will you forgive me? Always. The others didn't want to bother you. We assumed something must have happened. Ugh. They're going to be insufferable when I tell them you called me. She rubbed her forehead and sighed. They can be so annoying sometimes. Everyone is well then? Nothing's happened. Did you expect something to? He There'd been a certain fear. We're all fine. She laughed. Hazel and Jade have been telling people about your team. Well, mostly about how you're with that singer girl. It's gotten exaggerated, as most stories do. I'm fairly sure everyone thinks you're sleeping with her. Jaune relaxed against the nearby wall as he felt the earlier tension ebb away. Most people would recognize her as the heiress of the SCD. I don't think she's sung anything since coming here. You know how Ansel is. Sapphire shrugged. We're practically a backwater settlement. Either way, I think most people believe you're either engaged or married to her. Mum heard some of your old conquests talking about how you moved to Beacon to be with her. Weiss would kill him if she ever found out. Still, he couldn't help the ragged laugh that slipped past his lips. Home. It felt so far away, and it hadn't even been his home for the last 1,000 years or so. But he missed it already. You look tired. Are you sure you're okay, Jaune? I'm fine. He managed to smile for her. I feel better for seeing your face. Charmer. Sapphire smiled. It was true though. Just the sight of her made him feel a little stronger, a little more resolved. Take it easy though. We don't want to hear about you getting in danger again. Take it easy. Hey, you know me. When have I done anything but? I know you, which is why I can tell when you're lying. I love you, you know? We all do. Please be safe. I love you too. Give everyone else my love as well? I will. Sapphire sighed. She had noticed what he refused to say. Good luck, brother. The screen flashed black, and yet there was a certain strength that had returned to him as he stowed it away. This was why he was doing all of this. They were the reminder he needed. They were the reason he would keep on fighting. And it was time to do just that. Is that Jaune? Yang asked as Weiss's scroll went off. Blake watched the heiress answer it, though it appeared to be a message instead of a call. He says he's sick. Weiss drawled. Who could have possibly have guessed? Apparently it's a seasonal bug. Miss Kitsune recommends rest and no heavy activity. Blake felt the weight on her shoulders lift just a little. Not too much, and not enough to absolve her completely. But it was easier to breathe. She made the right choice in choosing to delay their little foray. Still, that meant him following her the previous night had made the situation worse. And that was completely her fault. I'll have to make it up to him somehow. What? That absolute... Weiss seemed to struggle for words. That cad. What now? The heiress tossed a scroll atop her sheets and turned away. She crossed her arms and scoffed loudly. I asked him if he would be coming back here to rest. She snapped. And he had the gall to say he wouldn't be coming back at all tonight. But he needs his rest, Blake said. And he will, the sneaky heiress snapped, likely in the arms of some cheap floozy. Ugh, that man. Blake looked to Yang in time to see the blonde looking back. The two shared a long exchange between them, before they sighed and turned back to Weiss. That's just how he is, Yang said. Don't take it personally. Personally? I'm not taking it personally at all. Who cares what or who he does with his spare time? Blake coughed and looked away. I mean, it's not like he's ill or should be looking out for his health or anything. Weiss went on. Nor is it like we're worried and want to make sure he gets some rest. No, it's fine. He can just run off into some bimbo's arms. That's just peachy. Blake shrugged helplessly and left Yang to go calm the volatile girl down. In a way, she was upset as well. Every time he did that, it was like he tossed aside their concern and ignored them entirely. Still, it was better than he did this than risk his health further with her. And since he'd be busy for the rest of the day, she could sneak off and go out alone. All she would have to do was break her promise. It was that easy. He kept his. The treacherous little voice in her mind whispered. But then again, who would expect a violent terrorist to keep her promise? Blake's teeth grit together as she scrunched her eyes shut. No. She would keep the promise she made. She wouldn't break it. It would have been too easy to, and no doubt would mark the first step on a long journey of losing everything she worked for. I'm a different person now. I can be a different person. You can't run away from what you were. It wasn't running. She wasn't running. She was doing the opposite and choosing to face her past, to face the White Fang. And that had to count for something, and it would. What did it matter if she did it today or in 3 days' time? It just meant that the White Fang had more time to continue their plans. She bit her lips so hard it almost bled. Wouldn't it be better if she could handle this without him? He wasn't well, and if she continued to make him accompany her, then he might not get a chance to properly recover. She couldn't give him weeks and weeks. The White Fang wouldn't allow it. But maybe she could work around that. It was a disgusting thought, especially since she knew he would never do the same. But maybe she could twist the words of her promise. She had promised to let him know of each location in advance, and she had. But she had also promised to not go out alone like the last time. He obviously meant that she should go with him, but those words had never technically been spoken. And he did need his rest. The fact he would be absent for the evening was simply too good an opportunity to miss. Another day, another White Fang base. There ought to be something wrong with that settlement. Jaune sighed and adjusted the hood that kept his face concealed in darkness. Really? What the hell were the authorities doing if they couldn't find any of these places? Today's place of choice was an old manufacturing plant for, if the sign was to be believed, industrial cranes. It was closed down and boarded up, yet even the blindest of people could have seen the lights had animated from within. At this point, the police have to be under Roman sway. This is pathetic. And of course, it wasn't like hunters had all the time in the world to patrol the streets. The people would see something odd and report it to the police, who would promise to investigate. Somewhere along the way, the message was clearly being interrupted, which prevented any hunters getting involved. All it took was one person in the right spot, he supposed. Roman would know better on that front. Crow, Ozpin, and Ironwood couldn't be blamed. Not unless they had an army of informants they could task to monitor every building in the city. Jaune sighed and slipped the mask back onto his face. The night air was chill and the moisture in it suggested rain. Either way, many of the White Fang members who approached had their hoods up against the cold. That helped to cover his as well as he walked past the first set of guards. They didn't even think to check or question him. One nodded and the other kept his eyes locked on the road, weapon clutched in one hand. They were stiff and uncertain, which made sense when he considered that they weren't soldiers. Both probably had far more mundane jobs they kept during the waking hours. Jaune's sympathy died an ugly breath as he fingered the hilt of a small knife hidden beneath the stolen uniform. They had chosen this path. If they'd gotten his way, they'd soon face the consequences. No matter who they were, or what they had once been, they were still his enemies. Ahead of him, more people milled back and forth, many in casual clothing. They clung together in small pockets which increased in size as they entered the building and looked around. There had to be at least 200 people, maybe more. So many. He forced himself to remain quiet as he leaned against a nearby wall. It can't be one of their operations, not with so few in uniform. His senses tingled, yet he didn't think it was a trap. They wouldn't need so many, and they'd have all been armed. This was different than the last time, however. "You there." A uniformed soldier pointed towards him. "Help me get the gear in position. We need to give those newbies a proper show." He desperately wanted to ask what this gear the fauna spoke of was, but managed to hold it back. Someone in his position probably should have known. Right. He nodded and followed after the terrorists. Where are we putting it all? By the back wall. The man replied and pointed it to the raised area. We want them in the back for a bit of extra inspiration. Most of these people don't know what they're dealing with, or how. It's time to show them how seriously we are. About time. I know. The grunt sighed. He waved one hand and led them outside, to where a number of large flatbed trucks waited. They had blue tops strapped across the top of their cargo, and the White Fang seemed to making good use of the crane facility's machinery to lift them into a standing position. Hey, guide them in, the man shouted over the noise. And for crying out loud, make sure they don't bump into anything. Over 6 meters tall, and shaped like some vague humanoid. Jaune's mouth went dry as he realized what that had to be. Had he done it? Had he found them? The thought had excitement racing through him, but it was tempered by fear as well. If these were what he thought they were. Careful, you stupid animals. That familiar drawl sounded out. These are worth more than you are. Now I admit, that wouldn't be hard. But what will be is looking at yourself in the mirror if you dropped them. Roman sauntered forward with a cigar in hand, cane in the other. His green eyes traced over the assembled terrorists with not a shred of fear. And who could blame him? Roman was powerful in his own right, but where he was present, his dangerous shadow would surely follow. Jaune's shoulders stiffened, but he forced himself to remain calm as he waved his hands and walked slowly backwards. A masked figure leaned out of the crane's cabin and looked past a broken windshield to watch and follow his instructions. Come on, keep going. Yep, straighten it up. He called as he led the concealed weapon back into the building. It would have been oh so satisfying to have this guy knock them down like a set of dominoes. Less satisfying would be Roman and Neo's quick response. Lower? Jaune shouted. Careful now. The crane whirled and chanted as a large bipedal figure was set down with a loud clang. Nearby, Vonis in various casual clothes looking on in awe and curiosity. The driver disengaged the hook with practiced ease and leaned out of the cabin once more to give him a thumbs up as he reversed back out. Jaune's heart leapt as he heard some sarcastic applause behind him. Nice. Roman deadpanned. Very well arranged. You're a credit to your parents, ancestors, or whatever nonsense you animals believe in. What was it all you're all fighting for again? Quality, sir. Jaune tried to keep his eyes down. Ah, yes. Quality. How cute. Well, keep doing the good work like this, and I'm sure you'll get some of it sooner or later. Jaune felt a surge of anger at the bastard's taunting smirk. He knew exactly what the man meant. Those who would be fooled into the Mount Glean mission, none of them were expected to survive. Even if the train hit, it would erupt with enough force to kill the Vonis on board. Roman meant the equality of the grave. I look forward to it, sir. I'm sure you will. Hey, tell you what, why don't you stand on the stage with us while I'm telling the rest of these people while they need to step up, eh? Roman grinned charismatically and leant on his cane. These kiddos aren't going to feel so hot answering to a human like me. But I bet a big, strong, freedom fighter like you will be a hit. If you want me to. What else could he do? Roman cocked an ear. Where was it? If you want me to, sir. That's what I like to hear. Roman clapped a hand onto his shoulder. Now then, why don't you go scurry off and meet me back here before it starts? Relieved, Jaune nodded and moved away, half expecting an attack from behind as he did. Roman whistled and sauntered off. However, it was fine. He had the mask, the outfit, and the reason to be here. There wasn't any reason to be worried. It was no different from every other time. Jaune headed back towards the cranes, changing course the last second as he bumped into a woman with some small horns. Sorry, he said as he helped her up and patted her down. It's fine. She stammered and stepped past him. "Excuse me." He watched her go for a second. She seemed young. A shame. He patted the scroll he'd stolen off her, now secured in his front pocket as he stepped back into the darkness. Another crane trundled by. Another paladin loaded and covered hanging from the line. "Anyone need another driver?" he asked the group of White Fang. "You can drive." Jaune planted his hands on his hips. "No, I just thought I'd randomly offer." "Fine, get in. The rookie here will guide you." "As long as he doesn't cause me any trouble." Jaune grunted and climbed into the cabin. The keys were already inside and the engine didn't so much roar as splutter fitfully to life as he turned them. The damaged window made it almost impossible to see outside, but he was able to maneuver it into position so that others could hook the wrench up. The window also gave him the cover he needed to hammer in a familiar number. You're still alive, I see," Crow said as an image appeared. "I figured you would be. I guess it was you when I got a call from someone I didn't recognize." "Well, aren't you the detective?" "Am I? Lately I've been feeling like I'm a certain someone's cleanup crew. You find another mess for me? What is it this time? Cereal on aisle 3? Stolen Atlas technology on aisle 4? Jaune made sure to keep his body language casual as he leaned out the window, the flickering scroll hidden in the crook of his arm. He heard the man on the other end gasp as he saw the hidden, but distinctive shapes. "I take it you're interested?" "Interested?" Crow shook his head with a laugh. "You could say that. I'm kinda also interested in you. You got a name I can call you by? Or am I going to have to give you one?" "A name?" He hadn't thought of that. And he didn't have anything prepared. Did he even want to give Crow a moniker to use? So long as he chose one with no connections to his identity, he supposed it couldn't hurt. Silver. A name. A color. It fit all the requirements. Yet at the same time he couldn't help but remember his father's face when he talked about an aunt Jaune could have easily loved. Silver, eh? Crow worked the name around his mouth. No doubt he tried to place a face to it, to see if it correlated with anyone he knew. It was just obvious enough. Just ambitious enough, however, that there was nothing. Alright then, Silver. I'll take it we're doing this the usual way. You're gonna stay there long enough for us to have a chat? Or am I going to have to chase you across the roof again? That would depend on how fast you can be. Jaune smirked and stowed the scroll beneath the seat. The white thing outside called the go-ahead and he slowly brought it inside, keeping a watchful eye on the young terrorist who waved him in. The paladin settled down with a clank and a wobble, the eyes of many going wide before its weight brought it to a halt. Down on the ground, one of the men in uniform rushed up to whisper something to Roman, who stood waiting nearby. Jaune crouched as he dropped from the vehicle, the hard ground sending a jolt of pain up his injured leg. Roman's eyes remained locked onto him as he walked up, but he smiled and held one arm wide. Well, there you go, the flamboyant thief said as the two ascended the steps up onto the stage. 5 or 4 paladins stood behind it, still obscured from view. Tell you what, why don't you do me a favor and pull this rope when I say, you can do the big reveal. Understood. Jaune nodded and accepted the thick rope. All he had to do was wait now. Crow would surely be enough to deal with Roman, but it was far more likely the crook would make a break for it as soon as the shit hit the fan. There was a reason he'd been around long enough to become the biggest criminal in Vale, and it wasn't because of his brave last stands. Good man. Roman laughed and turned away. If only all these little dogs were like you, would actually get stuff done around here. Lights throughout the factory began to shut off and the one above their heads seemed to shine all the brighter for it. The eyes of over 100 people turned towards the stage, to where a human of all things stood. Some in the crowd began to mutter angrily. Jaune shook his head as Roman grabbed their attention and twisted it to the side with a grace that almost seemed effortless. He insulted them to their faces, yet few even noticed. It was somewhere between sickening and impressive. Jaune wasn't sure which. Either way, The crook had them wrapped around his finger long before he gestured behind him. "And what do I bring to such an alliance?" Roman asked in that charismatic, phoretic manner of his. "Why? I would not dare come empty-handed, my friends. If you please." Jaune knew better than to refuse. With a great tug he pulled down on the rope. It fell from one of the loops atop the vehicle, causing the blue tarp to flatter and fall forward. The crowd gasped and began to chatter excitedly as the huge bipedal robot was revealed. Atlas' greatest weapon. Roman laughed. "Now in the hands of the White Fang. With these, you shall all achieve the freedom you've long since dreamed of." He turned towards Jaune and smirked. "The equality you've all been fighting for." The crowd went silent. Say what you would about Roman, and there was a lot to say. But he knew how to manipulate people. "Of course," Roman continued, "there are those who would stand against such a glorious future." The crowd shouted out angrily. "Who would stand against our union? Both external threats, huntsmen, huntresses, Atlas, and the people of Vale." The crowd booed and hissed, working themselves into a frenzy. "And also, internal threats." Roman finished as his hands fell. The fullness in the crowd went silent. Naysayers, cynics, and dare I say it, even traitors. Cool steel teased his throat as a heavy weight settled on his shoulders. Jaune flinched and glanced back into a pair of mismatched eyes. They were glinting happily, as though pleased to see him. "Isn't that right, friend?" Roman asked as he turned to face him. Jaune's knees hit the floor as Neo forced him down, one foot planted firmly in the middle of his back. He tried to move, only to freeze as the blade nicked his skin. It was all he could do to look up as Roman's footsteps brought him closer. "You were good," Roman said. "I almost didn't notice. Wouldn't have noticed it if I weren't looking for it." He brought Jaune's face up with his cane. It was a new one, Jaune noted. The old one had been lost at the docks. "Did you think we wouldn't start to pay attention when we lost a base? Did you honestly think we would still be ignorant when we lost two?" Jaune grit his teeth and maintained eye contact. All the while he cursed himself as a fool. It was the one thing he tried so hard to remember. The one thing that prevented his life being easily solved. People adapted. If life or time travel had been so easy, he could have gone back and fixed it all by now. But people reacted to changes and made new plans. How damn stupid had he been? Of course Roman would get anxious when he kept losing safe houses. Of course he would start to take steps to make sure that didn't happen again. Even then, Roman grinned, I still wasn't so sure. You blended in well. You knew where to go and what to do. But do you know what your mistake was? The crook seemed disappointed when Jaune didn't chip in. He pushed the teen's head away with a shove before turning away. You called me sir, he whispered. A bit disciplined for this rowdy bunch of racist fools, don't you think? And equality? Roman laughed. They don't want equality. They want vengeance. Nothing more. I'll tell you what though. I was honest about what I said. Life would be easy if half of these idiots were as good as you. But then again, finding you would have been more difficult too. You take what you get. Roman spread his arms wide and walked towards the crowd. Traitors in our midst, he shouted for the benefit of the silently watching crowd. Perhaps those whose resolve faltered. Neo, if you would. Jaune closed his eyes as his hood was torn aside to reveal a mop of messy blonde hair. He felt the girl run her hand through his locks. Or, Roman laughed, some infiltrator in uniform. Maybe next time you'll all remember to check one another for faunus features. His footsteps echoed as he strolled back to the restrained man and gripped him by his hair. "Either way, this one's responsible for the imprisonment of your brothers, for the failure of our operations. What shall we do with him?" The pain that flashed through his scalp was agonizing. Neo kept the blade at his neck still, the promise in that sharp edge ever present. His eyes scrunched shut in an attempt to ignore not only the pain, but his own rising nausea. He failed. Again. He didn't have to pay attention to hear the crowd's response. They roared for his death. "Any last words, traitor?" Last words. Something snapped within him, their anger and the loss mixing together into something unrecognizable. He pushed forward against the blade at his throat. "Do you think this is going anywhere, Roman?" Jaune hissed. "You may think you're hot stuff. You may think you're going to ride this revolution and escape when the going gets tough. But that's not going to happen." Roman's humor faded as an angry sneer took hold of his features. Jaune's anger fed off it. "You die like you lived, Roman. Insignificant and alone. Nothing more than fodder for the grim. You'll die because of her plans, and I'll be there to laugh when you do. You're awfully well informed, aren't you?" Roman sneered. "I guess if you know her, then you know what she'll do to you. Guess I'll spare you the wait." The barrel of his weapon was cold as it pressed against his forehead. There was no fear. He died 1,000 times already. What was one more? There was, however, something else. A devastating sense of loss, of grief. He wasn't going to just lose his life. He was going to lose the family he had come to love, the memories they had made together, the team he didn't think he had ever experienced before. Blake, Yang, and Weiss would be gone too, or at least the girls that he knew in this life. They would all be gone in a flash of dust and white sheets. Something foreign and unfamiliar burned in his eyes. There seemed to be moisture there too. "I won't ever stop," he whispered. "Not until I've killed you, Roman Torchwick. Not until I remove the stain you and your kind represent. I'll come for you." "Even if I kill you?" the thief asked with a cocky grin. It was wiped from his face with Jaune's next words, however. Or was it the cruel, manic smile that were delivered with, "Even then. I guess we'll have to test that theory." Roman growled and pulled the trigger, only for his aim to be thrown off as the world exploded and the ground shook. 200 pairs of eyes shot towards the source of the explosion, while Jaune threw his body to the side and off the stage.